What things would you do if you knew you could never fail? And I mean never fail. I recently talked about failure on my 3-day confidence workshop. Well, what if you simply couldn't fail? What if there was literally no way at all to fail? What would you do? What ambitions would you fulfill? Would you go for that job you've always wanted? Would you ask someone out that you really fancy? Is it possible to avoid failure altogether? This answer might surprise you. Absolutely yes, it is. The way to absolutely avoid failure is to don't ever do anything at all. If you never do anything and never take on any kind of challenge, well, you'd be absolutely guaranteed never to fail. But then you'd also be guaranteed never to succeed either. The reason I started asking this question is really because of hypnosis. When I use hypnosis, what I want is successes. I want successes with people. And so I want to avoid any anxiety or concern I might have about failure. And that's really one of the reasons why I started looking so closely at the psychology of failure. Many of my therapy clients come in telling me that they feel like total failures. That's the way they walk through the door. They tell me they're hopeless. In fact, they don't really need to tell me. You can see it written all over them. They tell me time after time that everything they've ever touched has turned to crap. Now, usually, they've guaranteed failure for themselves by setting impossibly high standards. Usually, these people are perfectionists. They absolutely believe that they should be perfect. They should have perfect looks. They should have perfect relationships, and so on. The truth is, of course, that being human, they can't have that. And so those impossibly high standards absolutely guarantee they will fail time after time after time. And day after day, they fail to meet the impossibly high standards they've set for themselves. What happens to someone's feelings of confidence and self-worth if they fail over and over and over and can't ever be the way they think they should be? Well, the reality is they just become more and more miserable and more frustrated, and they end up with the likes of chronic depression, low self-confidence, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of self-hatred, suicidal feelings. They're all common outcomes. And they also end up stuck with inaction and procrastination because they know when they undertake something they're going to fail. And of course, an ever-increasing expectancy of failure leads to even more failures still. By contrast, let's suppose you had no standards at all, no expectations. So this would be the absolute opposite of perfectionism. I don't know if there's a word for that even. But under those circumstances, it would be impossible to fail. Now, unfortunately, someone who did that would still be unhappy because they'd never achieve anything either. So what about the middle position? Fail sometimes, succeed others. Well, of course, in reality, that's what most people do. The problem with a mix of success and failure is that most people focus more on their failures than they do on their successes. Unless it's gambling, of course. And then the gamblers tend to focus only on the wins. That's really interesting. That's what keeps them gambling, because they ignore the failures and they focus on the wins. And it is interesting because just like a compulsive gambler, if people would only focus on their successes, they'd tend to stay excited at the prospect of having even more successes. Now, if you ignore failures and focus only on your successes, then it's likely you'll never procrastinate again. Sadly, most people dwell on their failures, and most people fear failure because of the rotten way they allow themselves to feel when they experience a failure. And I deliberately use the word allow. The only way you can experience the feelings of failure is if you allow it. In reality, it's a choice. If there was no pain attached to a failure, then you wouldn't fear it. It's the fear of failure and the way it makes you feel that paralyzes people. Because of the fear of failure, you don't start that business you want to start. Because of the fear of failure, you don't go for that better job or promotion. Because of that fear of failure, you don't go on that date or enter into that relationship. Time and again, the fear of failure stops people in their tracks. I'm going to go back to my first question now. What would you do if you absolutely knew, and I mean absolutely knew, you couldn't fail? What would you do? Well, you might start that business that you've wanted to start, or you might go for that job or that promotion, or you might go out on that date or enter into that relationship because you'd absolutely expect to succeed. I'm going to be quiet for a full minute and let you think about this, because I'm going to give you a way to never, ever fail again. What would you do if you absolutely knew you couldn't fail? Or even if you just had no fear of failure? Think about that for 1 minute. Okay, what did you come up with? All sorts, probably. You see, the whole idea of failure and the avoidance of failure has almost certainly made you feel a certain way. It created all manner of disempowering beliefs, and it also stopped you from doing the things you genuinely want to do. What's the solution then? Well, actually, there are quite a few solutions. Here I'm going to suggest just one of them. Incidentally, I talked about failure and the ways to avoid it at some length on that recent 3-day confidence workshop. And on that workshop, I looked failure straight in the eye myself. You see, at one point, I lined every attendee up. So I had everybody lined up in a row on a chair. And I took the entire group into deep hypnosis. And then I suggested that not even one of them would be able to lift their legs, and to really try to do that. Now, unlike a stage hypnotist who only works with the most suggestible people, I did this with the entire group. I didn't test for anything. I just simply did this with every single person on the course all at once, suggestible and not so suggestible. And what happened when I threw out this challenge? Not one person lifted their leg. Now, when a hypnotist does something like that, they face the prospect of failure every single time they do it. The reality is that in order to be a really great hypnotist, you have to thoroughly master the fear of failure. In fact, it's one of the biggest reasons why there are so very few really great hypnotists. Why was I able to do this with absolute confidence then? Well, the reason is because of the frame I put around it, which is one of, I cannot fail. And in order to get that level of confidence, I simply need to hold certain beliefs. If you honestly believe that you can't fail, then the amazing reality is you're far more likely to succeed. With an expectation of failure, most people fail. With an expectation of success, your subconscious mind doesn't cripple you with fear, and you're far more likely to be successful. Much of the time, it's fear that causes people to fail. And here's an example of that. Let's suppose you put a plank of wood about 10 feet long on 2 bricks. So you've got 1 brick at each end, and the brick is lifting that. Those bricks are lifting that plank about 4 inches off the floor. Would you feel confident that you could walk across that plank? Well, as long as you're reasonably mobile and so forth, almost certainly you would do. The answer to this question is yes for most people. But what if that same plank was 100 feet up in the air? How confident would you feel about walking from one end of it to the other then? Would you be as sure-footed crossing it? No, almost certainly not. The fear of failure actually causes people to wobble and fail. So in order not to fail, you need to eliminate the fears. And you can do that using the PS Tech Click Tracks, using the free download, that free therapy system. You can use those free therapy tracks to eliminate all manner of fears and phobias, and all sorts of other things too. If you haven't got them, just go to www.pstech.org and download them. You'll probably find a link on this page here for that. Another thing that you can do is change your beliefs. It's possible to deliberately create beliefs which turn what would have been failures into successes. Let me give you an example. Suppose you want to be able to walk up to an attractive stranger and ask them out on a date. Most people won't do that because they have a fear of rejection and a feeling like a failure if they get knocked back with a no. If you judge your success by that stranger's reaction, then absolutely you'd be setting yourself up for a failure. They might say yes, but they might say no. Now that's totally outside of your control, so why on earth would you judge yourself on that basis? It wouldn't make sense, but that's what so many people do. It makes far more sense to judge your success based on whether you have managed to do what you set out to do. If your goal is to get a yes from that person and not a no, then you might get a success, but equally you might get a failure. But if your goal is simply to walk up to them and ask them out, then no matter what they say, you've succeeded. This is about setting an intention which is achievable and one over which you have control, not no control. And if you set out to ask them and you do that, then you've succeeded. It's never a failure. It's always a success. Whatever their response, you've succeeded. Now, when you deliberately set things up this way, choosing an intent carefully, then failure becomes almost impossible. The reality is that you can only fail if you allow yourself to judge the outcome of your actions as a failure. If you change the yardstick by which you judge success and failure, then now what might have seemed like a failure before can become a success. Imagine the positive effect that having endless successes will have on your own level of confidence. And in order to do this, all you have to do is frame the way you look at things a little differently. Let's go back to our example of asking someone out on a date. By treating asking them out as your successful outcome, then you eliminate failure. And when you eliminate the possibility of failure, you also eliminate the fear of failure. If someone is really nervous, they're far more likely to get a no under those circumstances. But if you go up not caring about the outcome, because it's simply a matter of asking the question, that's your success, then because of the increase in visible confidence, you're also far more likely to get a yes. So before undertaking something that worries you, take a moment to set the rules by which you will judge a successful outcome. And stack the odds in your favour. Deliberately choose rules by which you will judge the outcome which practically guarantee you will experience one success after another. And when you do this, you can experience successes where before you were experiencing exactly the same things as failures. Next, imagine applying this principle to your entire life. With the correct attitude and by using the right yardstick to measure your outcomes, you can go into almost any situation knowing that whatever happens, you will experience at least some considerable level of success and not failure. And the more you do this, eliminating failures and turning them into successes, simply by using different means to assess your outcomes, you're going to be able to enjoy wonderful feelings of success time after time, and your confidence levels will soar. Remember to get the free therapy system from pstech.org. There's also Wealth of Abundance and a whole load more stuff. And maybe one day you'll come on one of my confidence courses and I'll show you lots more ways to change your entire life. Now, the feedback from the first course has just been stupendous. But for now, at least, use this principle. It's very, very powerful indeed, as long as you use it. I suppose while I'm talking about success, then I should tell you about the really exciting project we have for September 2013. Jeff Harding and myself, maybe with some special guests, will be talking you through the classic book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. We're going to take the chapters in turn and show you exactly, in a very practical way, how to use the PS Tech tools for changing beliefs and emotions in combination with that book and its amazing content to program yourself and your subconscious for whatever success you've dreamed about. I'll also be creating some very special hypnotic tracks to use in combination. So watch out for that, because it's very exciting and it's going to be awesome. You will get the chance to be part of it and increase your own quality of life. So that's something for September 2013. For now, thank you very much for listening, and I hope to speak to you soon.